Hi, everybody. This is Blaine DeSantis, and I welcome you to another edition of Books and Looks. Yeah, it's just my weekly podcast where I talk about a book that I've read, interview its author, and then we'll describe something that I've been looking at in the past week. Friends, this week we're going to be chatting with Mike Hutton. And Mike's written a very fascinating book called The Children of the 1940s. Now, this full review of that book can be seen on my website, viewsonbooks.com. And, we really appreciate you listening. We ask that you please subscribe or share it with friends because we keep growing and growing and growing, and that's the greatest thing I can think of. What a fun thing to do, to chat with books with friends. Anyway, Mike comes to us from England, and this book is about what the children of the 1940s went through over in England. That's right. You may say to me, Blaine, why am I doing this? Because so many people do not know what the British went through in World War II. And we know the devastation of France and Belgium and Holland and all those other countries over there, but Britain had their own difficult situations. And we here in America didn't have that. Now, we may have had some issues like rationing, but Mike's going to tell us what was rationed over there and even tells us how much longer after the war they were still rationing products in England. We're going to learn all about something called a Morrison table. I never heard about that. We're going to hear about the evacuation plans of the children out to the country when the bombings began and how those plans were in effect for almost 15 years and why. Very interesting. He gives us a perspective that we don't have because he is an 85-year-old gentleman who has written 12 books. And you will find out as we get to the end that he's ready to publish another book with another book on its way. If this is not an inspiration to all of you out there to sit down and start writing or start at least jotting down your memories, it's a wonderful thing. And that's what this is. This is this gentleman's memories as well as the hundreds of people he interviewed over in England, throughout England, what they went through. And so I think you're going to find this a very fascinating book. Again, it's called Children of the 1940s by Mike Hutton. Without any further ado, let's go right into that interview. Mike, welcome to Books and Looks.
Oh, it's really good to be here.
Well, I am happy to have you. As I've said to everyone previously, we know what the 40s looked like here in America, but we don't quite know what went on over there in Britain. And so I thought your book would be extremely interesting to people to know what was going on at that time and how it may have differed from what we experienced. So that's why I'm very happy you're here. But before we get into the book, how about a little bit about yourself? Where are you from? Were you university educated? And did you take any writing courses at all?
Right. Well, let's start at the beginning. I was born in 1938, so for my sins, I'm now 85 years old. I was born in a place called Hampstead in London. So I grew up in London during the Blitz and the war and what was all going on at the time. I did not go to university. Very few people of my generation went to university, but I went to a very good public school, or you would call private school, and that's where my interests were developed in history, English literature, and art. I think that would sum me up fairly well.
All right. Now, did you ever, while you're now writing, did you ever take any writing courses at all, or are you just doing this like I write? I don't have any training. I just start writing now and then.
I never had any training. I read some of your great writers like Ernest Hemingway, Faulkner. These sort of people were the basis for how I learned to write. Short and sweet and not too flowery.
Right, exactly. Short, sweet, to the point. We all get it. Don't need a lot of prose. Well, before you started writing, what did you do?
Yeah. I was in business for many years in the textile trade in partnership with a very big French textile company. But I'd always written for my children's stories. And so when I retired 20-odd years ago, I started writing. And so I've had about 10 or 11 books published. And as I say, I've got another one in the stocks, and I'm just starting yet another book now. So I'm quite prolific.
You are. Now, you are considered a social historian. First, could you define what a social historian is?
I think I can. I think I could sum it up very simply that ordinary people live extraordinary lives. And that is really what social history is. It's about ordinary people rather than kings and presidents. It's about the people you and I meet every day of the week and the lives that they live, and which is often really quite extraordinary.
So a lot of your books, I'm assuming, are therefore nonfiction books, that they're taken from your interviews or whatever you're doing, and you get the voice of the person.
That's right. I have written a couple of novels as well, but yes, generally speaking, nonfiction.
Now, do you find over there are a lot of social historians or people who are writing social history books? Do you find there are a lot over there?
Yes, it's a popular genre. I think people are fascinated by nostalgia. And so, yes, looking back. But of course, there's not so many people writing about this era. It's quite strange. And the people who do write about them tend not to have lived through it. And I think that's the extraordinary thing about this book, is that all the stories come genuinely from people who were living there at the time. And it's funny, you said maybe the American people think we lived very differently. Lots of the English people living today had no idea what life was like back then, which was so different, a different world.
Well, that's great. Not only are you educating us over here, if people are interested over there in England, they're going to get this. You're going to find out, wow, Grandpa did this, or this is how it really was, and that's really, really great. Well, now, what made you want to focus this book on the children of the 1940s?
Well, I suppose it starts from the fact that I'm a child of the 1940s myself, and I knew that the life we led would be considered today quite extraordinary. I mean, any young kid coming back into the 1940s who are living now, they just wouldn't recognize it. It could be back in the dark ages as far as they're concerned. No internet, no computers. In Britain, no television, no refrigerators, nothing. It was just like living in the 19th century.
It was. Oh, my word. We don't realize that. You see, these are things we don't quite understand. No. Well, now, was it, even though you lived through this yourself now, was it a hard book to research? I mean, we're not talking about decades since this happened in this era. Is it a hard book to find research on and find people to relate their experiences to you?
Not really, but as I say, I wanted to look at, firstly, I looked for people in different parts of the country to try and see what the differences were there, but also at the different social backgrounds, because Britain in the 1940s was absolutely dominated by class. Class was everything, which you don't have so much in the States, I know. It's not so prevalent now, but in those days, I mean, for example, I think I'm right in saying that a few thousand families owned about 80 or 90% of the wealth of the country. It was very, very feudal in a way.
Wow, that's really something. Now, when you go, you say, I want to go to different parts of the country, see different people. Do you knock on the door and say, hey, is Grandma or Grandpa home? I'd like to talk to them? Or how do you get people to open up to you?
I think most people want to tell a story, especially when they get older. They think, well, they've lived a bit, and they probably think, like all of us, well, we haven't got that much longer, so we may as well tell our tale.
Yep. I've always told everybody that, you should at least try to write a book of your own personal history. It doesn't have to be published, but just something that you can leave your history and your background to your children or grandchildren so they understand what you went through. And I think this is what you're doing very well over there. You begin with a fascinating prologue in which you state that you think that today's TV shows and movies depict the 1940s improperly. And that's fascinating because there are a lot of those shows. So, well, what do you find that they're making these mistakes? Where's that coming from?
Well, basically, the shows today, movies and TV dramas, are written by people who were not alive at the time. So they use the wrong vocabulary, the wrong pronunciation. The actors look too well fed. the average height of a man in Britain before the war was about 5'6", 5'7". You've got these great big guys now, and haircuts are wrong. The glasses they wear. I mean, no good-looking actor wants to look like they looked in the 1940s with his smarm back and parted down the middle. They wouldn't be seen dead like that.
Okay, but some of the facts they do get correct, you think?
Oh, I think, yeah, some of them are really good. I think there was a film recently called 1917, I think it was, which was a very, very good depiction of the First World War. But even there, they come in with modern expressions, which I guess most people wouldn't even notice. It's only a grumpy old man like me who picks it up.
I read a book recently, called The Trees, and it was written back in, I think in the 1920s or 1930s. But the gentleman who wrote it went back and researched the vocabulary of the time so that the book itself was a little bit different for me to read because he was using vocabulary from the 1700s and a lot different. And even the 1940s is a lot different. Yeah.
Even the accents, if you listen to newsreels, people speak like this: hello, this is London calling, hello, very nice to see you. Nobody speaks like that anymore.
Yeah, we're losing our accents here in America because of everybody moving hither and yon. Well, now, you start in chapter 2 I think it's called Setting the Scene, and you talk about what the kids in the 1940s witnessed, and this was dramatic and dynamic set of changes that any generation had ever faced. And what are some of those changes and what's going on that these children faced back then in the 40s?
Well, I think I started by saying my earliest memory was being pulled out of my bed by my mother, and we had blackout blinds because obviously any light that showed you could get bombed. And I remember pulling these blinds up and saying, look, remember this, London is burning. And as I looked out to the east, the whole sky was alight. So these were and then later on, it seems quite extraordinary, being taken out into the garden, and there was a sort of deadly ballet going on ahead with Spitfires shooting at Messerschmitts right above, and all the people in the gardens were out there shouting and cheering and booing. Then, of course, one of the planes came down. We didn't know what it was, whether it was one of ours or one of theirs. And it was actually, he got out, he was a German, he parachuted out. My mother wouldn't even allow me to see him when he was brought back on a pitchfork and given over to the police. So these were the sort of things we were experiencing.
Wow, that's really so. Now, you said was that during the Blitz?
That was in 1940, 1941, something like that. And the children, we used to go off to school in the morning, and we used to collect shrapnel, which was the discharge from flares and incendiaries which had been dropped the night before. And there was a big market in swapping different types of shrapnel because they glowed. I mean, it was a very innocent sort of childhood in a way. It's quite strange.
I remember a couple of British pop groups from the 60s and the 70s who, when they were relating what was the inspiration for some of their songs, they would say, well, we played in the bombed out areas of London, and we might find a flower growing there or something. But it's amazing that stuck with those people, and who are a little bit older than you. And
but they were absolutely right. We were barred from. There were so many bomb sites that they tried to stop the kids going in, but of course it was a wonderful playground. So we all went in there and played. And you're quite right about the flowers. I remember it very well in all these bombed-out buildings. Wonderful flowers that have not been seen in the cities for years started sprouting.
You know, one of my favorite shows I'm dating myself now, was a show called Danger UXB, where they had that group that went in to disarm the unexploded bombs. There really were things like that.
Yeah.
There were? Okay.
Yeah, I didn't what's that personally, but no, they're very brave people who did it.
Yeah. Wow, that's really something. Now, one of the other things that we're interested in today is talking about food rationing. what was rationed and what about the quantities and was it easy to get the ration food?
Well, I thought you were going to ask me that. So I can remember some. I've got here a list of what it was. Now, for example, we were allowed meat. That was 1 shilling and twopence a week, which bought you just one little piece of lamb like a lamb chop. Would you call a lamb chop or lamb cutlet? So one of those. All you were allowed was the following: 2 ounces of cheese, 3 pints of milk. What else have we got here? Sugar, 8 ounces of sugar. This is all a week. Preserves, you were allowed, for instance, jam or marmalade, £1 every 2 months. So everything was rationed. The only thing that wasn't rationed was fish. But when fish came in, the queues were so long that people sort of gave up. Also, the other thing that was never rationed were vegetables, fruit and vegetables. So if you lived in the country, you could live quite well. But you see, if you lived in the city, you were allowed 1 egg a week.
1 egg a week. Wow. That's really something. Now, I think you tell a story in there where Winston Churchill said when he told about 2 ounces, he said, "Oh, I can do that." Unfortunately, Winston didn't realize that was a week.
Yeah, in a week. They brought it in, this stuff on a plate. He said, "Well, I don't know what everybody's complaining about." And they said, "Excuse me, sir, that's for the week."
But you also had no way to keep things cold. And you didn't have refrigerators or things like that. So, long-term storage was an issue.
Well, in the summer, when it got hot, the only way to keep milk from curdling was putting it in a bucket of cold water. But you see, the winter was much worse. We were freezing. It was awful. There was no heating. Half the time electricity was off lots of the time. And when you woke up in the morning as a kid, you had icicles on the inside of the windows.
On the inside, not the outside.
Yes, on the inside, yeah, because it was so cold. And you used to have terrible chilblains. If you have big ears like mine, it was purgatory. A totally different world.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things you talk about is something I never heard before, and that's something called a Morrison table. What is a Morrison table? How was it invented? Who's it named after? Give us a little bit of background on the Morrison table.
Yeah, well, we had one at home. It was named after a guy called Herbert Morrison, who was the Minister of, I think, of Supplies or War. I can't remember. Minister of War, I think. And it was a big metal table, which it's the size of a big dining table. And it was really tough. And underneath it, if you can imagine, it's got 4 legs like a normal table, but underneath it, you could lay a mattress so that you could lie in there during a bomb raid. And we had, unless you got a direct hit, it helped if there was peripheral damage. You had a grill at the side, which actually stopped you from getting cut and so forth. And it was very useful. So unless you got a complete hit, you were likely to survive under that thing. And I can remember lying there with my sister, listening to the planes going over and coming back again.
My word. And while they were going over with a mission, I think I've read, and it may be in your book too, if they didn't drop all their bombs, they just sort of drop them intermittently over London, just get rid of them.
My mother used to, very frightening. She'd hear them going north when they bombed Coventry, for example. They blitzed Coventry. And then she got really nervous coming back because they had to fly back and not have any bombs left. So they just chucked them out anywhere on the way back. And we had some fall very close to us.
Wow. That's really something. Now, let's talk a little bit. I got to move on here. Let's talk a little bit about during the Blitz. And then you had the V1 and the V2 bombing. So it went from bad to worse, I think, didn't it? Those V1s and V2 were brutal. That's
right. Just as we thought that, things were getting better. So we used to call them buzz bombs came in. And the V1 but the worst one was the V2, which was very powerful. And there's a story in there where a lady who I got to meet, her mother was deaf. And what you had to look out for was you could hear it cut out, and you knew if it cut out, it was going to fall straight down. And they were sitting there getting ready to eat their Sunday lunch, and she heard this, pulled her mother under the table in the room where they were living. And of course, the bomb did fall right next door to them, blew the whole side of the house in. And this is an actually true story. Their Sunday lunch was still in the cooker, so they took it out, sat at this table which had been blown all over, so propped it up with books, and solemnly sat there and ate this food covered in dust and everything else, because if they didn't eat that, they weren't going to get much else.
That's the proverbial stiff upper lip there when you're doing that.
Oh, really was, yeah. And she was quite a girl, this girl, I tell you.
You know, the Blitz and the V1s, as I said, you knew they were coming. The V2s they cut out, and then they just did it damaged everybody. And
then once it cut out, everybody just dashed for cover. Yeah, and it did create terrible damage.
Now, you tell a story in there. You were told by someone by the name of Robbie Burns, whose father was an ARP warden. Now, I don't know what an ARP warden is. What is that?
Yeah, well, it was, I think it was called air raid protection, and they used to call these guys air wardens, and their job was to go around making sure that there were no lights showing. But the guy we're talking to, he belonged to something called the heavy lifting squad, and their job was really gruesome. When the bombs came, they had to go and pick people out. And the story you referred to, and it is very sad, was he picked this girl that cleared all this rubble and found this little girl covered in dust. She looked quite deathly, but she seemed totally unmarked. And he lifted her out, and she said to him, "Am I going to die?" And he said, "Of course not, darling. Don't be silly. You'll be fine." And she closed her eyes, and that was it. And it was very, very touching and very, very sad.
Oh,
it brings home to you, yeah, how awful it is. Not a mark on her. Lovely little girl, 6 or 7 years old.
My God. Yep, that's what's going on, unfortunately. It's not just in England, and it's all over now.
I'm afraid it's dreadful.
Yeah. Now, you talk about sheltering in the underground subway tubes, if I'm not mistaken. You did that yourself, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I didn't do it myself, but my parents, if we'd been into town, into London to visit, into the centre of London to visit relatives, I can remember getting off the tube, and the platforms were just full of people in sleeping bags, because that was the safest place to be. And it was very noisy. They had people singing and dancing. There were lots of. So that was, in a way, very good. But some people got really fed up with it. People brought their banjos and their saxophone, and it was very strange.
Yeah, it must be, because you're herded underground, and then what do you do? You got to do something to break the tension. Might as well listen to some music, But not everyone wants to hear that. Wow. Well, that's really, really something. Now, what amazed me was, one of the other things that we know happened was that children were relocated from the cities out into the country. And apparently this plan was developed as early as 1925. That surprised me. Why was it? Do you know why they started worrying? Do that?
Yeah, I think that the government never really trusted the Germans that they wouldn't rearm. And of course, it was quite low key in those days. And of course, even when the war came, we weren't really well prepared, but they had sort of prepared for this. You talk about this evacuation. I'm doing a launch of my book here next week, and I have a guy coming up from London called Ronnie Pitt, who's coming up specially. He was one of the boys who was sent off and put on a train, arrived in this station. All the kids went off, and one by one they were taken off, and he ended up in a little teeny village up here, very close to where I live now. And he was stationed with 2 ladies, and although lots of the stories were very unhappy about kids who were evacuated, some of them were treated very badly. he kept in touch with this family right the way through till he was quite an elderly guy. So there were some very good stories and some very sad stories. I think when the London kids got sent to the countryside, the countryside people thought, oh, my God, these are like sort of urchins. And they were, so it was never easy. Nothing is easy in life.
When these kids were shipped, they had no idea who was going to be the family or foster family, or whatever they want to call it, that they were going to be living with. So
no, not at all. You see, most of them, they hated the countryside, lots of them. And they'd never even seen a cow or a sheep. They'd lived in the middle of and they had no idea what the hell was going on.
No, they wouldn't. And then to be pushed into that, and maybe have to do some work around the stables and everything else, mucking things out.
Yeah, and I think some of them loved it. Of course, they learned skills, and some of them really did like it. But of course, like everything in life, some didn't.
Were you one of those evacuated to the country?
No, I was not. Well, in fact, I was, but my mother brought me back again. I think lots of people did. Lots of Londoners decided that they preferred to take the risk rather than being stuck out miles from anywhere. So, yeah.
That's something you never see. And I never heard until I read your book that people actually brought the kids and came back to London.
Yeah, yes. They'd rather risk getting bombed.
You know, it's funny because you talk about they never really trusted the Germans. I'm reading another book right now where the Germans were supposed to be completely disarmed after the Treaty of Versailles, that there was supposed to be no more airplanes or any airships, but yet they kept building airships and the technology kept getting better. Well, now let's talk just a minute about something called a British restaurant. Now, there's another term I'd never heard before. Tell us what a British restaurant is and where was it located and how many people did they feed?
Right. It was really founded because originally it was meant to feed people who'd been bombed out. So it was very basic food, really. I mean, food that today none of us would even look at. And it was often in temporary buildings. And eventually it became very widespread. So it wasn't just for people who were bombed out, but it was a form of getting a cheap meal, which served a lot of people in the time. So most big cities, most towns would have had what was called a British restaurant. And it was pretty horrible. I can tell you, it's pretty awful.
Well, yeah. What type of, you lived through, what type of food did your mom eat? What are you able to make with this limited amount of food that you could have?
Well, nothing. The whole thing was that supposedly nothing was ever wasted. And they used to put out recipes where you could cook on scraps. You never threw anything away. For example, if bread went off and it was really sort of totally stale, you were told, right, get some milk, boil some milk, and put the crust of bread into the milk, and then you can feed it to the children. So but having said that, I mean, I mustn't make it sound too bad, because in fact, the diet we had, although it was very sparse, it was very good for us. And you didn't see any sort of overweight kids in those days. I think I'd describe us as a skinny army, and we were absolutely skinny. But I think the food actually that we got was probably good enough. It just wasn't very tasty.
One thing I wanted to chat about was a TV show that we see over here and seen over here, and I've watched it 2 or 3 times. It's called Foyle's War. I want to ask you, was crime rampant during the war in the 40s? And does Foyle's War do a pretty good job at depicting that?
Yeah. At the low end of crime, for example, because food was rationed, people would set up printing presses so they could print petrol coupons or food books. So you actually had ration books where you had to take it in. So that sort of crime was quite common. And the people who dealt in sort of stolen goods were called spivs, and they on the street corners you'd find them. But at the very worst end, there were people who pretended to be ambulance men and they would go, and where a bomb has landed, they'd be in there first, and so they would go and take the picking. I mean, there's some dreadful stories. There was a very famous nightclub in London called Café de Paris that was bombed in 1941, I think it was, and these guys went in and they were taking rings and bracelets off dead people, dressed up as if they were officials. So there were some terrible people around. They often got caught and sent to jail, thank God.
There wasn't a whole heck of a lot of entertainment, but I think radio was there. And tell us a little bit about the entertainment and how that actually was used at dual purpose, had not just entertaining.
Yeah, the radio was our lifeblood, and it was a mixture of music, drama, comedy shows. So the comedy, if you listen to it today, you think, why on earth anybody would laugh at it? It's really dated. But yes, I think we had something called Children's Hour, which obviously all the kids listened to. And it was wonderful. They used to do things like Black Beauty and all children's stories, but it was very good. And of course, the other thing we all did in those days, which very few youngsters do today, we all read. Reading was a great escape. You could read, and you got lost in the book, and it was wonderful. You could forget about all that was going on around you, and you were taken into a magical world.
And then I think you mentioned that it's also used to pass messages along, if I'm not mistaken, the radio?
Yeah, that was, yes. We used to have 1 o'clock lunchtime. They would have the news, which lasted 10 minutes. And then after that, there would be these very strange messages. And it would be like, perhaps they'd say, the conductor has lost his violin. The conductor has lost his violin. And then there'd be another one. Sugar lumps are available today. Most of these messages meant absolutely nothing. But one, in a while, was giving a message to underground agents who'd be working in France or Holland or wherever it was, alerting them to do certain things. And they were the secret messages that were sent.
Okay. So, yeah, not every lump of sugar that's available meant it was a secret message. But they had to do that to just disguise what is really secret. Wow.
Yeah, it was trying to work out. The Germans would obviously try and work out which was a real message and which was the false one. And sometimes they'd just be totally false all the time. But once in a while, they'd drop something in which the person who was behind the lines in occupied territory would pick up and be able to act upon.
Wow. Well, now, we turn to later on in the book. You have a chapter that deals specifically with something called surprise packages. Could you tell us, what is a surprise package?
Well, I can indeed. I mean, first of all, to say, of course, the Americans arrived over in Britain, and they were very welcome. They were really, but we thought they were fantastic. All of your soldiers looked like officers to us because they were all so smart. One thing that the kids all found was that they were really friendly and outgoing, whereas Brits tend to be a little bit reserved. However, of course, being guys on their own away from home, there were lots of romances. And the surprise packages were, if a British guy had gone off to fight in the war, and he came back and he found either his girlfriend or his wife had a surprise package for him, which was courtesy of an American serviceman.
So there are certainly some of that was going on, and I bet that's quite a surprise to many of those servicemen. I guess anybody would be surprised, yeah.
Yeah, we tell one fantastic story, I think, in there. I don't know if you picked it up, but a guy called Tony Webber. And I always felt this should have been a movie. I mean, it's so moving and it's so true that his dad, or the dad he thought was his dad, was fighting in Libya, was very seriously hurt. And he came back, and the girlfriend or his fiancée was there with a surprise package, a little baby. And to his eternal credit, he still married the girl. Tony grew up, and he couldn't quite understand why this dad was very nice to him, but rather distant compared to the other children that came along later. He also realized that all of these kids were tall and blonde, and he was short and dark, and he sort of thought this was rather strange. And of course, eventually he overheard his mother talking about this, and he realized that his dad, that he taught had been his dad, was not. So when his father had died, he decided to try and track down his own and real father. And he found out that the guy's name was Philip DiMeglio. So he got in touch with the American Forces people, and they were very helpful. And he got a list with about 100 DiMeglios. So he wrote to, I think I'm right in saying he wrote to all of them, saying that there was going to be, had they been stationed in a place called Street in Somerset in England, and if they had, would they get in touch? And lo and behold, somebody did get in touch with him, and so he rang through to this guy, and he said, "Philip, is that Philip DiMeglio?" "Yeah, it is." He said, "Tell me, do you remember a girl called Rose Sharon?" And there was a big pause on the end of the phone, and the guy said, "Yeah, I sure do." He said, "Philip, I don't want to shock you, but I am your son." And then he heard all this shouting in the background, this woman saying, "What the hell's going on?" Anyway, to cut a long story short, he said, "Look, I've got to come out and meet you." And Philip said to him, "Look, boy, you're too late. I'm dying. I've been given less than a week. I'm riddled with cancer. You'll never make it." He got on a plane. He got out there. They met. It was all incredibly emotional. And astonishingly, on the day that Tony was leaving, he went to make his last visit to Philip. And as he drew up outside the house, they were bringing him out in a coffin. He'd waited. And it's an extraordinary story. And that's what I say. Ordinary people live extraordinary lives. Yeah, so that's just one of the accidents of war.
Yeah. That's it. And friends, this is one of the stories that you get in this book. They're little vignettes at times, little bits about it, and you learn the people, you learn what they went through, what the British went through. And, if it happened in Britain, folks, it happened in France probably. It happened in Belgium. It happened. Britain's different because they weren't invaded, at least. Yeah, so it happened there, and we don't really appreciate that. And after the war, how long did it take Great Britain to rebuild itself? And then was there ever a return to normalcy at that time?
In a sense, I'm not sure we ever did recover. I mean, we were bankrupt. 2 world wars had actually virtually bankrupted us. And so after the war, it was a very, very slow rationing. Food rationing didn't end until 1954. Rationing completely didn't finish, until 1958. So, and life got worse after the war rather than better. Rationing became even harder. And then, of course, it was made much worse because in 1947, we had the worst winter of the century. There was just snow upon snow upon snow upon snow. The docks were all, you couldn't move any traffic. The crops were frozen in the ground. And that went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And, of course, there were power cuts. It was really dreadful. And, of course, then what happened was it all melted, and then there were terrible floods everywhere. So it was a tough time. But gradually, very, very gradually, things got marginally better. We had, of course, there was a royal wedding in 1947, which cheered everybody up a bit when the Queen Elizabeth married Philip, and they were like a golden couple. So that was good. And then in 1948, there was the London Olympics, which again was quite something, although you wouldn't recognize it from the Olympics today. It was a very low key, but it was, so, and then of course later what happened was that we had started getting lots of people coming in from the ex-Commonwealth, which caused quite a lot of trouble at certain times with guys coming from abroad. It was very slow to recover. And in a sense, in many ways, perhaps we never did quite recover. It's a strange thing. It's still a great place to live, I have to tell you. I'm not running it down. I mean, I don't think most guys would live anywhere else, but it's very different.
Well, and it's funny because shortly after the war, Churchill was removed because everybody said, well, he's a war prime minister, not a peacetime prime minister. But I don't know how good a job the peacetime prime ministers were doing. That's the question.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was a huge shock, of course. I mean, I can remember that the day the war ended and I was taken, and I remember watching Churchill on the balcony at Buckingham Palace with the King and Queen. And it was... And of course, they thought that he would walk in, but he was defeated. He was out of time. And as you say, a great wartime prime minister, but he tended to live in the past. And of course, the socialists came in 1945, and they made huge changes, including bringing in our National Health Service. And it was the start of a more equal Britain coming in.
Now, let's bring this up to today and think about our kids today or grandchildren, whatever you may have. You think they could handle this?
I think youngsters can handle anything. I don't think human nature changes. I think they'd find it extremely difficult and funny and hard, and they'd hate it to start with, but they'd be great, I bet. Like all kids. Most children are optimistic at heart, aren't they? And so they'd win through.
Exactly. If you train them into just something different, they're fine. But everybody just sits there, watch a TV show or play with your computer or on your phone. And, there's many things to do other than that in life. So they would learn that if they had to survive now with that.
We had to make our own entertainment, and it was very modest and, very simple. We played football in the streets because there were no cars around. Yeah. And in fact, we didn't even really have a football, and it was a moth-eaten thing. We never got new presents. We always got hand-me-downs. We got hand-me-down clothes. Yeah, it's a different life. And if you were given something to eat, you were told, eat it up, or you won't get anything else.
What's coming up with Mike Hutton? You said you got another book coming in, and you're working on another one. Tell us a little bit about these.
Well, it's a very different book. It's called City of Shame. It's about London. It's about murder, violence, and sexual scandal on the streets of London.
What is the time period for that?
Right from about the 13th century through to modern day, to the 1960s. And then I'm starting now a new book on Edwardian England, which was a very wonderful sort of halcyon days, but it was a very short period just before the First World War. So that's what I've been up to since.
Wow, you're busy. 85 and you're still writing, huh? God bless you, because these are stories and books that we don't get. And I'll tell you what, big shout out to the people over there. I think it's Pen and Sword Publishing, who do a lot of your publishing of your books. That I love that thing. I learn a lot from your books. So,
well, I believe you can still get the books in the States. They're available through Amazon or all the other websites.
Absolutely. Well, anyway, hey, listen, Mike, I know you've taken time out of your day. I appreciate you coming on Books and Looks. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed it today.
Well, I loved it. And I would just like to say thank you so much. And if there are any people there who might contact you, who might want to make contact with me, who want to be put in touch with, please put them in touch with me.
I will do that. Very good. All right, friends, we're going to be back in just a moment. Well, thank you, Mike. I really, really appreciated that, and I learned a lot from your book, and I hope all of you out there who are following me also get some great insights as to what that generation had to go through over in Britain, and you can pick that book up. It's now out, and I think you'll enjoy it. It's certainly worth reading. What have I been looking at? Well, this past week I have been on hold. That's right, I've been on hold. How about you? Have you been on hold? It seems like every time I call something or someone or somewhere, I am placed on hold. It is nothing but hold, hold, hold. And friends, I am 70 years old. I'm too damn old to keep holding. I want to talk to somebody. I don't want to hear the same music again and again and again. Oh, it infuriated me this week. Why would this be? And I'm not going to name names, But I'll begin with, I wanted to book a flu shot, okay? So I call the doctor's office, because we like to go to the doctor's office, okay, as opposed to some people go to the pharmacy, or some people go to the pharmacy and the grocery stores. I like to go to the doctor's office, okay? So I call, and the very first thing it says, if you want to schedule a flu shot, press 6. And now, what would you do? Right, you press 6, and that's exactly what I did. And I sat there, and it rang, and it rang, and it rang, and it rang. And my wife, dear Magda, who has infinite patience compared to me, after 3 minutes said, why don't you give it another minute? At the 4-minute mark, it kept ringing. I said, that's it. So I called back to the doctor's office, and I go to the scheduling person. And I tell them, I said, I've been trying to schedule my flu shot. I pressed number 6, and I'm just getting it ringing. To which she informs me, well, that line doesn't work. It never has worked. Then why the devil is it up there? Why are you telling people to go to line 6 and then it doesn't work? Now I've wasted 4+ minutes on hold. That's not the only place. I have a question. Okay, we all have our foibles. Okay, one of my foibles is I like my oranges fresh from Florida. So I order from a company, okay, a family farm down there. So I push a button, call them. Boop, 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 boop. Okay, hello, how are you doing? I explain the problem. Let me put you on hold. And now I'm on hold again. And I'm hold for another minute. And the lady comes back to me and says, well, why did you get this email that says your fruit has been sent? Well, I said, I don't know why I got the email. You sent it to me. I didn't send it to myself. Well, let me check on hold again. Now I'm on hold again. Finally, after around 3 or 4 more times, and this is a very nice lady, she can't understand what's going on. The fruit hasn't even been picked yet. They created a label, but they don't have any fruit for it. So, I've been on hold with that. Now I'm checking on my order for turkey, because again, we all have our foibles. Like I said, I like my turkey. I get it from a certain location, have it shipped in, okay, put on hold. I call my friend, a stockbroker, I should say. And what do I get? Hold. Nothing but music. I am so sick and tired of being put on hold. No matter what you're trying to do, folks, I don't know about you, but I am put on hold on every phone call. It used to be you would get the call centers over in India or Pakistan. I'm not getting those anymore. No, I'm getting put on hold. You think technology would be better. You think things would happen faster. No, it's frustrating. Call any doctor, you're going to be put on hold. Call almost anything, and you're going to be put on hold. When people call me, and I'm talking to somebody, I'm not about to put them on hold. I said, I got to take this other call. I'll talk to you later. And I hang up. Fine. Then I go right to the other call. No one's on hold with me. Nope, not at all. Unless I don't want you, then I just don't even ignore, and I just ignore you. But, the bottom line is I'm tired of being on hold. And so as I go into this Thanksgiving season, I got to say, please, please, please don't put me on hold. Please, please, please. That's my one Christmas wish. Stop the hold. Stop the hold. So anyway, that's what I've been looking at. There's another silly little foible I had to look at what bothers me and irritates me. But anyway, that's what's getting me this past week. Anyway, for viewsonbooks.com, for Podcast Studio X, and for Books and Looks, this is Blaine DeSantis saying, may all your leaves be pages in a book.